And we're live.
Okay. Hello. It's Tuesday, 4 o'clock Pacific, 5 o'clock Mountain, and here in Costa Rica, 7 o'clock on the East Coast, midnight in Dublin, 1 a.m. in London and most of Europe, 8:30 and 9:30 a.m. Wednesday morning in Australia, 11:30 a.m. Wednesday morning in Australia, and it's Facebook Live. And hello and welcome and glad you're here. Please tell us where you're coming from and what part of the world you're in, what city you're in. And it always just reinforces for us the magnitude of what we're doing when we see people from all over the world. So it's really great to know you're here. I see Rhonda's here. Oh, Karen is in Costa Rica. Well, that's great. Sue's in Ottawa, Deb's in Florida. Oh, how great to see. Rhonda's in White Rock, British Columbia. Beautiful country there, just beautiful. Susan's in California, Todd's in Ogden, Bob's in San Jose, and it goes on and on. Thank you, and I'll keep referencing people, and thank you for joining. Also, a big shout out to our #1 fan, Quincy, and her family in Iowa. They watch every week, and Quincy is an up and coming, look out for this young girl kind of person. I mean, she is dedicated to health and making sure that she and her family get healthier. So way to go, Quincy, and hello and high five to you, girl. Yep. I think Quincy, if I remember correctly, is 12 years old now. I think so. Quincy, tell us if I've got the number wrong. Just write it in the chat, and I'll correct myself if I need to. And our guest today this is really great. I'm really very excited to have Jenny Finke with us. And Jenny is part of our team now at theDr.com. And I met Jenny, I think the first time was when she reached out about her book. And she was writing a book, and I saw the title of the book and I just laughed. And I said, oh, we need this one. And it was Dear Gluten, It's Not Me, It's You. And what a great title. And so, hello, Jenny. Glad to see you with us tonight.
Thank you for having me. And thank you for writing the foreword to my book and all your support. It's really incredible.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, there have been thousands of people who have benefited from that. We'll put the link here tonight for the book so you guys can get it. And it comes from a way of looking at all of this that's very different. Jenny, can you talk a little about what was the motivation for this?
Well, the motivation for writing the book is that, breaking up with gluten feels like you're breaking up with a boyfriend or girlfriend or something. Right. And there's a physical breakup, there's an emotional breakup. And so I started to write this book about, how to break up with gluten. And it sort of wrote itself in a way. And that's where that title comes from, Dear Gluten, It's Not Me, It's You. Just sort of to go along with that relationship breakup theme.
Yeah, because you write from your firsthand experience of the frustrations and the obstacles and why doesn't every doctor know this kind of world? And you went through quite a health journey to figure this out for yourself. Knowing what you know now, is there anything that you could have done different at the time when you were trying to figure out, why don't I feel so well?
Right. Oh, there's so much in hindsight, right? I think when you first find out that you need to be gluten-free, whatever reason that is for you, it is a shock and it's overwhelming, and there's so much to learn, and you have to do so much and change so much about your life, not just what you eat, but your whole life. It really does change. And I think I was just so focused on eating gluten-free that I didn't realize how damaged my body was. to be honest. And, you can't always see the damage on the inside, but I was feeling sick. Yeah. And I knew I wasn't healthy. I knew something was wrong, but I really didn't know how to fix myself, really. And that's how I've stumbled upon your work and some of the other great books and leaders out there in this community, and started to understand, like, wait a second, that gluten-free donut, yeah, it's gluten-free, so that's okay. But eating a lot of those gluten-free donuts that I did in the beginning probably didn't help me feel better.
Right. And that brings up right away that I think most of us, when we're giving up a food that has been primary in our lives, just complete every day, multiple times a day, toast for breakfast, sandwich for lunch, pasta for dinner, croutons on your salad, a bagel, a cookie, a muffin. I mean, every day. Probably the most common food for most people that they eat. And to give that up is quite disruptive. And then to find that you have to be gluten-free. And so you go to the gluten-free baked products and the gluten-free pastas.
Right.
Then you learn that that's not so good for you. So can you talk about the emotional aspect of that? And
right.
if there was frustration, what was it like?
Oh, there's so much emotional aspect. I mean, so many people, and I think you guys will all relate to this, is that, like, you don't feel like cooking tonight, so we just order a pizza, right? You can't do that. And there's you have this attachment to pizza, or you have attachment to bread, or special meals with your family, or traditional meals for your culture or religion or whatnot. And so I actually felt a huge loss. I felt a huge loss that I couldn't eat these things that I loved. And if you were to ask my mom, my favorite food growing up, it was like spaghetti with sauce on the side, right? Like, I just love spaghetti and pasta. And so giving up that there was not just that, physical craving for it, but there was that emotional comfort for me,
Yes.
to have a big bowl of pasta or things like that, which I still honestly will have pasta. I haven't cut it like completely out of my diet. I don't think anyone should be 100% like fruits and vegetables, right? But I definitely, have changed what I put on my plate, what I put on my fork. All that stuff has definitely changed over time. But that emotional connection to food, it's so normal. And it's probably the thing that I struggle with more. Like, now it's like, I don't want the gluten because I know it's going to make me sick, but there's still times that I feel left out. And even this past weekend, I went to an event, a celebratory event, and everyone's eating the fried food, the pigs in the blanket, all those kind of things. And I'm just sitting there with my glass of water, right?
Yeah.
And it feels a little uncomfortable at times. And it feels like, oh, no, I'm a little left out of this situation. And it's okay, because I'm doing it for myself. But those are the hardest aspects. Not that I wanted to eat the food. I just really wanted to be included and not feel like, a social pariah at that moment.
Right. And that's important to recognize. And most of us don't. Most of us have the "I'm fine" attitude. And, fine means frickin' insecure, neurotic, and emotional. That's what fine. Hi, how are you? I'm fine, thanks. How are you?
Yeah.
You have no idea how that person is. You have no idea what's going on in their lives, right?
Right.
And it's important to not fall prey to the "I'm fine" syndrome and dismiss what's going on internally, but to recognize what's going on. And that sometimes it's isolating to not eat the food that everyone else is eating. I know for me, I don't have that very often anymore, but on occasion, I mean, I spent 25 years in Chicago. I mean, deep dish pizza
right.
was not our bread and butter, but it was a treat. And to have people around me eating pizza, in a restaurant, and I'm having my baked fish and whatever, which is really delicious. But sometimes I feel a little frustrated still. And I don't know that ever goes away. That's okay. Because if you recognize it and you just kind of live with it, and be grateful that you're not sick anymore the way that you were, and just have those feelings come up, then you don't unconsciously regress into shoving down 3 or 4 gluten-free muffins. Well, I can eat them. They're healthy for me. They're gluten-free. No, they're not. They're just not poison for you.
Right.
But they're not healthy, and there's a big difference.
Finding that balance is so important, not depriving yourself, because we know that's why diets don't work, right? People starve themselves, deprive themselves. 95% of diets, like, people gain the weight back in a few months. So it's really like, if you treat it like a diet, you will probably fail at this. But if you do treat it as this lifestyle change, like, I know I don't want the gluten, and I do, I do things to mitigate some of those emotional things, the emotional responses that I still have. We're bringing my own food or communicating ahead of time at events and things like that. That can help me feel more normal in these situations. But to be honest, I don't really want to eat the gluten. I just want to, I do sometimes want a piece of pizza, or I do want to feel normal at times. And so there are ways that I can do that without just letting go of the gluten-free lifestyle altogether.
Yeah. And for me, I really want to eat the pizza. I really do.
Of course.
Right? And
occasionally, right?
Yeah, occasionally. And Marzi makes great pizza. I mean,
Nice.
it's so satisfying when she makes it. And I'm remembering when we lived in northern Italy that there was a place close by that had a gluten-free pizza option, and they had a little section of the restaurant where nothing else was prepared there, just the gluten-free pizzas. And so that was great.
Amazing.
That was great to have.
I got to go to Italy someday. Everyone keeps telling me about the food. We were supposed to go in the summer of 2020 for our 20th anniversary. And obviously we didn't go to Italy in 2020 with the COVID, but that's my dream place to go, because it was supposed to be a gluten-free haven.
It's much easier there. In general, it's much easier. We have a couple of questions. Let's start with the first one. I've heard that Epstein-Barr virus can turn on the celiac gene. If so, will treating Epstein-Barr virus put celiac in remission, or are you stuck with it? And I'll take this one. Yes, the Epstein-Barr virus, because of molecular mimicry, if you produce antibodies to the virus, some people can turn on the antibodies to wheat from that. So let's say you found out you were gluten-free, you stopped it completely, you retest 6 months later, the blood tests are now normal, you don't have elevated antibodies to wheat, which is great, but then you contract Epstein-Barr. Well, you are always going to be sensitive to wheat and developing elevated antibodies if you get an exposure to wheat. And for those who have been around for a while, you understand the concept perhaps of memory B cells, meaning your immune system never forgets. It won't make elevated antibodies to wheat any longer once you eliminate the exposure to wheat. So your antibody load will come down, but there are certain things that we take in, certain foods or bacteria or viruses, that the immune system looks at it and says, that kind of looks like wheat. And so not only do you make the antibodies to the virus in this question, but you also can turn back on the hypervigilant memory B cells that are there to protect you. If you have not had elevated antibodies to wheat in the past, this is my theory. I've never seen an article on this, and I always have to tell you if it's my conclusion or if there's some hard science. This is my conclusion. If you've never had elevated antibodies to wheat before, Epstein-Barr will not turn on the initial elevation of the antibodies to wheat. But if you have had elevated antibodies to wheat in the past, that means for the rest of your life, you are now vigilant to make sure no wheat gets in. So if something comes in that kind of looks like wheat, the protein structure kind of looks like it a little bit, that's called molecular mimicry. And that can trigger turning back on the elevated antibodies to wheat from an Epstein-Barr virus. Yes, and there's good science on the Epstein-Barr can activate, but we don't know, no one's ever checked, well, does that person have a 15-year history of not having elevated antibodies to wheat, and all of a sudden it got turned on for the first time? There's no science that I'm aware of on that aspect of the question. So your question said, can the Epstein-Barr virus turn on the celiac gene? And the answer is sometimes. And I'm not sure, but as I explained, sometimes. Jenny, anything you want to add to that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think you answered it beautifully. And I do know that a lot of times, just because you have the gene for celiac doesn't mean it's going to turn on. But a lot of times that it has to be some sort of trauma in your life that can turn it on. And so Epstein-Barr could be that trauma that turns it on. It doesn't mean it's a given, like you said, it's not a given that it's going to turn it on. But a lot of different things can turn it on. Viruses, pregnancy, I think, is for a lot of people, just like any sort of trauma to your body can turn on your genes.
Next question. Hello, Dr. Tom and Jenny. I love your newsletter, Jenny, and look forward to reading it every Friday. I try my best to let my server know that I eat gluten-free when I eat outside of the house, but I don't trust the restaurants to be careful, especially after hearing about the Columbia study. Do I just take Wheat Rescue or E3 Advanced Plus no matter what? How can we ever feel comfortable outside of the home? I don't get symptoms, so I don't know when I've been glutened. I eat gluten-free because of you, Dr. Tom. That's from Jill on Facebook. Thank you, Jill. Thanks for the clarity of the question, too. And we were just talking about this earlier today in our meeting, weren't we, Jenny?
Yes, yes.
We were. So I'll let you start with this one.
Yeah. Well, Jill, I have trust issues, too. Eating out is really hard. And there is a lot of trust in who is preparing your food. It is up to us to ask the right questions, to really choose restaurants wisely, to have conversations with the waitstaff and the chef if necessary. But, I do think that one of the reasons a lot of people who are on the gluten-free diet, get glutened eating out is because we don't order as safely as we could too. And like we talked about pizza, gosh, it's so tempting to want to order pizza when I go to a restaurant because it just tastes good, right? Even the gluten-free pizza. But that is a really high risk for cross-contamination. And so, when you do eat out, I usually approach it in a way that if it's, a restaurant that isn't completely gluten-free or really good at gluten-free, that I usually try to order something much safer on the menu, like a piece of fish or a baked potato. These things are harder to cross-contaminate because they're not prepared and handled in the same way that something like pizza or pasta would be handled. But the second part of your question, I may even throw back to Dr. Tom a little bit, but digestive enzymes can really be that extra helper to help you in case you do get gluten, a little bit of trace amounts of gluten when you're eating out. It's not an excuse to eat gluten, but sometimes, you get a little cross-contamination that can help. It helps more in people who have non-celiac gluten or wheat sensitivity. People with celiac disease, even if you eat trace amounts of gluten, you still could get the autoimmune reaction in your body. And Dr. Tom might have more to add to that as well. But so sometimes I do take those digestive enzymes when I eat out, just in case, though, just to help me digest the food. So I feel a little less sick if I am going to get sick, but I really don't get sick that often eating out. I'm really careful.
I took my sister to a nice chain restaurant named J. Alexander's. This was in Detroit. And, they have nice foods there, fresh fish, things like that. And my sister ordered a piece of salmon. And we told the waiter that we both are gluten-free. And he said, okay, not a problem, not a problem at all. And so I then said to him, how is that? What's on the plate with the salmon? How is it served? And he said, well, the salmon's grilled with a little bit of salt and butter, and there's some rice on the side and some fresh vegetables sauteed in olive oil with garlic. I said, okay, but please tell the chef we are gluten-free. And he said, oh, there's nothing on there that has gluten in it, sir. I said, I understand, but please tell the chef. And he said, well, but there's nothing that does. And I just, please tell the chef. And he just looked at me and kind of huffed off because I was direct with him. He wasn't listening. And he came back, and to his credit, he came back and said, sir, I apologize. I was rude and I didn't mean to be rude, but I apologize. And chef adds a scoop of flour to the rice when it's cooking to make it stickier. So the rice is not gluten-free. And I've had that happen 3 out of 5 times in Japanese restaurants with the sushi rice, that they add a scoop of flour. It's fairly common to add a scoop of flour to sushi rice. Wow. So you go to a Japanese restaurant, you think, oh, this is safe. I'm just not going to use the soy sauce because they put wheat in the soy sauce, and you think you're safe. But if you don't ask the question specifically to the sushi chef, because the waiter or waitress won't know that they put a scoop of flour in the rice. The waiter or waitress won't know that. So that is why I am a strong advocate that anytime you don't have complete control over the foods that you're about to eat, meaning someone else is preparing them, or you're using a bottled sauce and the list of ingredients is not on there or something like that, homemade salsa or something, that you always take the digestive enzymes. And there's 2. The first is called E3 Advanced Plus. We'll put links in here for you. E3 Advanced Plus, and that has some extra ingredients that are called bacteriophages. That they're good viruses. You know, we have thousands of viruses in our body. We all do, and just don't talk about it very often. But bacteriophages are good viruses that kill bad bacteria. So if you have a history of GI complaints, whether it's bloating or gas or stomach pains or constipation or diarrhea, E3 Advanced Plus is probably the better product for you to take. The other product is called Wheat Rescue, and it does not have the bacteriophages, but it has some extra digestive enzymes, hydrochloric acid and some pancreatic lipases, to be a little more comprehensive to digest all of your food. Both of them have the comprehensive enzymes to break down any inadvertent exposures to wheat. They both work. Now, and what one of our staff was saying earlier today, we were talking about this, well, Dr. Bryan, I take both. I mean, is there a problem with that? I said, no, absolutely not. Marzi and I do the same thing. You know, if I'm going to have a gluten-free pasta dinner, which I'll do about once every 2 months or so, I'll take both just to make sure I'm on the safe side. Jenny, anything you want to add to that?
No, I think you covered it. I mean, one thing I would ask you too, just since I can ask questions too, right?
Yes, of course.
In the celiac community, which is a little different as well, you know, there's a lot of people who say like digestive enzymes really don't help in the, you know, preventing the autoimmune reaction. What would you say to that?
Absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. They do not, unless they're ours. The ones that we put together were designed specifically to not activate toll-like receptor 4 in the small intestine, which is the sentry standing guard. They're specifically designed so nothing gets through the stomach into the proximal part of the small intestine. Most of the gluten digesting enzymes out there, they don't work in an acid environment. They have to have a more alkaline environment, which means they're going to work somewhere midway towards the end of the small intestine and then going into the large intestine. They work really well, but they don't work in the first part of the small intestine where all the inflammation begins. That's why we put these enzymes together the way that we did. They work in the stomach to digest any inadvertent exposures to wheat that you may have? So that's a really good question, Jenny. So people that take most of the gluten-E's, whatever the names are, of these digestive enzymes out there, they really do work, but they take 3 to 6 hours to work. But food comes out of the stomach into the first part of the small intestine in 90 minutes to 2 hours. So you need enzymes that work quickly in a stomach environment, and most all of the enzymes out there do not.
That explains why it usually takes about 90 minutes for me to feel sick after eating. If I ate at a restaurant, then I'm like, ooh, that didn't agree with me. It usually takes an hour or two.
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. That's why that happens. Everyone, it's listed under the names, everyone on Zoom says, will Marzi share her gluten-free dough recipe? And yes, I'm sure she will. I'll call her in here in a minute, and we'll talk about that. Amanda on Instagram says, for people sensitive to gluten but not celiac, eating gluten, is it possible? I think she means on occasion. I don't know what that word is, expodiatically, but I think it was the computer did a spelling error. So if you're gluten sensitive but not a celiac, can you have it on occasion? Jenny, do you want to start with that one?
Well, we've talked a little bit about this too. Well, honestly, I feel like you eat gluten, you undo all of the work that you've done. And Dr. Tom even talked about this in the beginning, that your body remembers wheat. And isn't it true that wheat is the only food that we know that your body makes memory B cells to? So it doesn't matter if you have celiac or a gluten sensitivity, your body remembers, and it creates that inflammatory cascade every time you eat gluten, really, or wheat, I should say, for non-celiac wheat sensitive people. Right.
And Amanda, I'm going to take that a little bit further. The science that we teach to all healthcare practitioners, I'm leaving in about 10 days, and I'm lecturing in Dublin, and 2 talks in Dublin, 3 talks in London, and then we're going to Rome. And what we tell all the practitioners is that you can't be a little pregnant. You can't have a little gluten. Once you've crossed that line of tolerance, because as Jenny says, the memory B cells are always vigilant to protect you from this toxin. And what that means is that in the first part of the small intestine, right where food comes out of the stomach into the first part of the small intestine, the sentries standing guard there are on guard 24/7. And they're just relaxed. They're sitting around, they're kind of dormant, but they're standing guard. And what are they guarding from? They're guarding from if you picked up an apple off the ground and you ate it and there's a bug in there, a bacteria, they identify the pathogenic bacteria and they go after it immediately with very powerful rifles, creating inflammation, firing bullets of inflammation called cytokines. And they're on guard 24/7. And when that begins, when toll-like receptor 4 gets activated, it turns on the entire antibody cascade, meaning that if you came in with Hashimoto's, thyroid disease, and we found out you were sensitive to gluten, so that was part of the treatment to get you stable, was to get gluten out of your diet, and all the antibodies to the thyroid come down to normal range. So you didn't get rid of Hashimoto's, you just put it in remission, right? So there's no symptoms and you're not getting worse. But if you get an exposure and you activate the inflammatory cascade in your gut, in the first part of the small intestine, that turns on the thyroid antibodies again. And those thyroid antibodies will stay elevated for 2 to 4 months from one exposure. Because when you turn on that assembly line to make the antibodies, it doesn't turn off in a day. it'll stay on for a few weeks. That's the whole concept of vaccinations. It'll stay on for a few weeks, but just from one exposure, that's all it took. You got one vaccination, and it may, let's say, is for yellow fever. You're going to Africa, so you get vaccinations for yellow fever and dengue fever, and these weird diseases that we're never exposed to here. And you have to get those antibodies or the vaccinations months in advance, because your immune system has to build this assembly line and train the soldiers to go after yellow fever, train the antibodies to go after dengue fever. And there's a general who's watching all of this in your immune system. And when all of the bugs from the vaccination for yellow fever or dengue fever, when all the bugs are killed off, General Yellow Fever says, okay, turn off the assembly line. We're okay. So it takes a few weeks for that assembly line to stop. And the antibodies that you produce towards the end of that time have a lifespan of 4 to 8 weeks themselves. So not only is the assembly line making the antibodies for yellow fever or dengue fever beforehand, but also you've got general yellow fever and general dengue fever that their job is to be vigilant the rest of their life. Right. And they are called memory B cells. And you get memory B cells to gluten. So if you get an inadvertent exposure, like, for example, a paper came out a few weeks ago that showed, in looking at, I think it was 15 different packets of lentils. Was it lentils, Jenny, that I sent you the paper on? Do you remember? Lentils.
I'm not sure.
Okay. I think it was lentil, 15 packs, that there were 3 packs that had 1 kernel or 2 kernels of wheat in them. And that means that when you're making your lentils, one of the dishes is going to have a wheat kernel in there. And all it takes is just an eighth of a thumbnail, just the tiniest little amount, to activate general gluten, to activate the memory B cell. And he flips the switch, and now you're making antibodies again to gluten. And if your sensitivity, your genetic sensitivity, was to Hashimoto's, and it's now in remission, but now here come the antibodies again to your thyroid, and your Hashimoto's comes back from an inadvertent exposure to wheat. That's why the enzymes are so important to take in the midst of when you're trying to eat squeaky clean, but you're going out to celebrate or something. Jenny, anything else you'd like to add to that?
Yeah. Oh, I think a lot of people just give up on this so quickly. Like, it's not working for me. But when they really, look at their diet and look that maybe they were, I'll eat the birthday cake, it's my birthday, they do these behaviors where they might cheat, or they may not worry about cross-contamination. They'll eat a French fry that might have been cooked in the shared fryer or something like that. And then they say it's not working for me. Gluten-free is not working for me. I'm giving it up. I get emails a lot about that. Like, it didn't work for me. I'm not going to do this. And I think that most people don't give it that fair shake, that they don't do it right. And that's really a danger to this process, is that if you're going to do it right. Otherwise it won't work for you. You're right. It's not working, but you can't blame the diet. I think you have to really look at the way that you are managing your gluten-free diet.
Well, that's a critically important point. Thanks for bringing that up, because we're all used to taking a pill and our pain goes away, or our headache goes away. And so, all right, I'm doing this. Okay, I'm gluten-free most of the time. No, you can't be a little pregnant. Yeah. You can't have a little gluten. It just doesn't work like that. That's why the enzymes are so important, so critically important. Ahmed on YouTube says, I've been diagnosed with celiac disease and my kids are sensitive to gluten. Are they prone to developing celiac disease? Do all grains have gluten? Okay, the answer to the first question, Are they prone to developing celiac disease? That's an easy one to answer. Just do the genetic test. This is a time when I think the genetic test is of value. I usually don't recommend the genetic test, except for a condition like this, where although if the kids are already identified as being gluten sensitive, it doesn't really matter if they have the genes for celiac disease or not, because they may have the gene for depression, or they may have the genes for Hashimoto's thyroid, or they may have the genes for rheumatoid arthritis. And so their gluten sensitivity may manifest as depression or Hashimoto's thyroid or Sjogren's or scleroderma or psoriasis. My point is celiac disease is not more important than any of the other autoimmune diseases that may be triggered by a sensitivity to wheat. But to answer your question, Ahmed, just do the celiac genetic test. The genes are DQ2 and DQ8. It's a very easy blood test to do. And it doesn't have to be a blood test. Some laboratories, you can just take a cotton swab and go inside the mouth, and get a little of the saliva, but you rub it up against the gums. So it doesn't even have to be a blood test to check that.
And I'll add to that is that I've had celiac for 10 years, and I've had my kids tested like every couple of years. I was having them tested for celiac disease. I was just maybe a little paranoid, wanted to know. And then it hit me like, instead of testing them, let's see if they even have the gene. Let's see if they have the gene for celiac. So I did have both my kids genetically tested, my son in a doctor's office with a blood test, but my daughter, we did an at-home cheek swab test for her. And then I was able to just find out, I think it was more of a curiosity thing to know that if I should, is this something I should watch out for? Obviously, I think in my family, we eat pretty exclusively gluten-free. My kids might eat a little bit of gluten at grandma's house and stuff like that, but they're pretty much on a gluten-free diet. But I just wanted to know, and I think that they can have that information now and decide, well, maybe if I have the gene, I could be on this spectrum, and I have a good chance of getting celiac disease, since it is a genetic disorder and I am predisposed to it. So I think it's valuable. I definitely see what Dr. Tom is saying. It's like, it may not change what you do and how you eat, but sometimes knowing can be helpful. And I do think there is a lot of value in knowing if you have celiac disease. There's studies that talk about adherence to the diet is stronger if you do have celiac. It's unfortunate that it has to come to that, but we do know that there are some benefits to knowing if you do have celiac.
We have, there's a paper that came out about 9 months ago by the godfather of autoimmunity, Professor Schoenfeld. And he talked about non-celiac autoimmune diseases and gluten. And they did a literature review, and they found that, I think it was 74% of the people got better on a gluten-free diet. And this was confirmed in 60% of the studies that they looked at, which means not everybody gets better on a gluten-free diet, but a lot of people do, somewhere around 3 out of 4. And they identified the autoimmune diseases. This is about 25 different diseases, wasn't it, Jenny? I mean, it was just this large number of diseases, from diabetes to psoriasis to Hashimoto's thyroid to Addison's, that's the adrenal glands, to inflammatory bowel disease. I mean, the list went on and on and on. And we have the godfather of autoimmunity saying, gluten-free diet helps a lot of these people, not all of them, but a lot of them. So Ahmed, to your question, if your kids are already sensitive to gluten, you need to be a gluten-free house and be educating them on how to protect themselves in the future, because it will manifest somewhere. It'll manifest as obesity or as malnourishment, both ends of the spectrum, thyroid disease, loss of hair. I mean, the list goes on and on of the potential manifestations of a wheat sensitivity. So celiac disease, but given it's already in the family, it's worth checking the genes. And the test that we truly recommend is called the wheat zoomer. And we'll put a link in here for that. The wheat zoomer is the most accurate test available on the market. And there's nothing like it anywhere in the world. And I'm not exaggerating. And you can do it with a finger prick. It doesn't have to be a blood draw, and it's just as accurate. And the laboratory, because of supplies that are happening now, they have a number of tests called Zoomers. They're all corn Zoomer, dairy Zoomer, soy Zoomer, all those. And they're all great tests, which can be done by finger prick, but they're stopping offering the finger prick on all of those other tests so they can continue to offer the finger prick on wheat zoomer, because they only have a limited number of supplies for the finger prick test. And it's so important to identify the sensitivity to wheat, they decided all of the other tests, we won't offer the finger prick until the supplies are renourished again. And they don't know when that's going to be, unfortunately, but they have no control over that. But with the supplies they have left, they're keeping them for wheat zoomers. So you can do the blood draw or you can do the finger prick. And the last part of your question, do all grains have gluten? Just about all grains have gluten, but gluten is not bad for you. Bad gluten is bad for you because there's gluten in rice and there's gluten in corn, there's gluten in quinoa. So if you have a sensitivity to corn, then the corn glutens are bad for you. But in general, if you have a sensitivity to wheat, the rice gluten is not bad for you. The corn gluten is not bad for you. But about 50% of celiacs have a problem with corn also. So it's very common that other gluten grains can be a problem once you've crossed that line of tolerance. But in general, all the gluten-free foods are made with rice flour, corn flour, potato starch. Jenny, anything you want to add to this one?
Yeah, I mean, it's just important to note that that bad gluten, I guess, is in wheat, barley, rye, and sometimes oats. Oats are actually naturally gluten-free, although they have gluten in it, but not the bad gluten in it. But they are cross-contaminated
very common.
With wheat when they're grown and produced and packaged and harvested, all that stuff. So oats are very important for you to look for gluten-free labels and even better certified gluten-free, just so that you know that those oats have not been contaminated or they've been what they do, for some commercially produced oats, they'll sort them optically or mechanically, they'll wash them and they'll be tested that they are safe. And even oats that are grown on dedicated gluten-free fields, those also need to be tested to be gluten-free. We just know how, crops spread when the animals can spread the gluten all over the place. So, as long as you know that company has tested the oats to be gluten-free, they are safe. And actually oats can be a great source of, fiber and prebiotics and things like that in your diet too. So I do encourage people to eat some oats on occasion as well.
In general, we have a guest.
Oh, yay. Break time. Baby time.
Let's, I unplugged the microphone. Come here. Yeah. There's a question. You share your gluten-free pizza dough recipe. Yes. Yes, the answer is yes. There's Gio. Say hi, Gio. There's Jenny. Hi, Jenny. Hi.
Oh my gosh. So cute.
Yeah. Okay.
I just want to say a quick hi.
So let me go to the next question here. Bring it back up again. So we need to use a different cutting board and toaster. I don't have celiac, but I'm gluten sensitive. And that's from Linda on Zoom. And the answer is yes, Linda. That's exactly right. If there's wheat in the house, you need to use a different cutting board and a different toaster. Yes. Colin on Facebook says, or Colin, so just because it says wheat-free and gluten-free doesn't mean that it's okay to eat. Unfortunately, that's true. The slam dunk study on that came out of Columbia University in 2019. And they sent 804 people out into the community with testing equipment in New York and around the area. And they went to gluten-free restaurants and ordered off of gluten-free menus. When the waiter or waitress walked away, they then opened up their briefcase and took out their testing equipment. It's called NIMA, N-I-M-A, the testing equipment. When the waiter or waitress brought the food back, they then tested the food. And each of these 804 testers were asked to order 7 different dishes. So that's 5,624 dishes that were ordered on gluten-free menus. 32% of everything was not gluten-free. It tested positive. 52% of gluten-free pizza is not gluten-free. 54% of gluten-free pasta is not gluten-free. Bye. Bye. Mwah. Mwah. Okay. Okay. So 54% of gluten-free pasta is not gluten-free. It's unfortunate, but that's the state of affairs today, which means that anytime you go out to eat, you take the enzymes with you, because the likelihood that you're going to be exposed to something is fairly high.
Right.
That's why we're so proud to have these enzymes. And we did a lot of work to put together the enzymes that are as effective as they are. Jenny, anything you want to add?
I'll add to that too in terms of products, because you really did address the restaurant issue, which is very scary that so many restaurant dishes that are labeled gluten-free contain gluten. But we also see that with products, that there are products that are gluten-free right now, but contain wheat in the form of gluten-free Codex wheat starch. Some of the products that come to mind are manufactured by Char, which is a big gluten-free brand throughout Europe. And we're even seeing this new frozen pizza from DiGiorno, which is getting lots of controversial comments on it, that contains wheat starch, but it is labeled gluten-free. So a product can be labeled gluten-free and still have wheat in it. And then the opposite is true too. It can be labeled wheat-free and still contain gluten in the form of barley or rye. So like you might see it in a lot of candies and things like that, where it'll disclose that it contains wheat, but then if you look, it has like barley malt in it or something like that. So technically these products are wheat-free, but they also contain gluten in another form of gluten. And so it is confusing in the product area as well.
Yes, it is. Oh, he's back.
Oh, good.
He's back.
Oh, cute.
Next question comes from Anonymous on Zoom. Is there a relationship to diabetes and celiac? So with that one, I'm going to share my screen to show you this one because it is so startling. And let me bring it up here. This is a study. It's called the Norwegian Mother and Child Cohort Study. And what they did was they looked at 86,000 children over the time period from 1999 to 2008, and they followed them all the way up to 2018. So some of them for 10 years, some of them for almost 20 years. And what did they find? They estimated the hazard ratio for mothers' intake of gluten up to week 22 of pregnancy. And then when the baby started eating, if they were eating wheat up to 18 months of age. And they followed these kids for 12 years. What did they find? Hold on a minute. I think he's okay. There was a 46% increased risk of developing diabetes for every 10 grams per day of gluten that these children were eating or that mother ate during pregnancy. 46% increased risk of developing type 1 diabetes. Now, and their conclusion, our results show that a higher intake of gluten by the child at an early age may have a higher risk of developing type 1 diabetes, 46% higher risk. So how much is that? The amount of gluten in a single slice of bread can range from 2 grams to 4 grams. So this was 10 grams a day. If they were eating 10 grams a day, they had a 46% increased risk of developing diabetes. So what are your kids eating? And is that a slice of bread? No, it's half a loaf of bread there, right? And that's the kind of thing that we're up against. So yeah, and there are many, many studies like that that talk about the association of gluten and diabetes, both type 1 and type 2. Jenny, anything else you'd like to add to that one?
I might mess this up, but there's this study that's been going on in Colorado, where I live, in Denver, through Children's Hospital, where they are looking for just children. Like, you go in your pediatric office and they'll test you for type 1 diabetes and celiac. And it's actually a type 1 diabetes test, but because these two diseases sort of coexist, they're testing for both. And right. One of my friends actually did it, just randomly went to the pediatrician and said, "Oh, I'll do the test." And she found out her daughter had celiac, not type 1 diabetes, but celiac. But this study that they're doing here in Colorado right now definitely is seeing a huge correlation. I don't have the stats yet, but there is a correlation between the two disorders.
Yeah. Kathleen on Facebook says, how long do your enzymes stay effective after ingesting? How frequently should they be replenished if eating over 2 or 3 hours in a social setting? That's a really good question. And when you take the enzymes, they last about 90 minutes, and then they're coming out of the stomach into the first part of the small intestine. So if you're eating a social gathering over 2 or 3 hours, you always take them to begin with before you start eating, always. Normally, with digestive enzymes, to assist somebody in their digestion, we recommend that they take them in the middle of a meal, so that the enzymes will be sitting inside the glob of food in your stomach in the middle, and they digest from the inside going out, and then your own digestive enzymes will digest from the outside coming in. That's normally how you take digestive enzymes. But for these enzymes, you don't do that. You take them before you start eating, so they're at the bottom and nothing gets through. Now, when I'm doing a pasta dinner, big bowl of pasta or gnocchi, then I'm going to take them at the beginning, and then I'll take some more in the middle, because I'm not just having a little exposure. I'm going for the gusto here, right? So I'll take them that way. Jenny, anything you want to add to that?
No, I mean, I think it's important that we know that our body does make digestive enzymes too. So we do always have that support as well. But this added digestive enzyme support is so crucial when you're eating food, again, not prepared by you. So it's just that extra, like, insurance policy that's really good to have.
Right. Deborah on Zoom says, I understand the frustration and isolation eating gluten-free. I am a whole food vegan and now gluten-free. I feel so isolated and have had some suggest that I am really picky and too hard to feed, so no invites to dinner. And then when I go out and when I do go out, choice at restaurants are limited. That's true. Jenny, how would you respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you are multiple diets, you're more than just gluten-free, you're also following this whole food vegan diet as well. It does get tricky. I think that social isolation can be hard. And I think that one thing for you, one advice piece of advice I'd have for you is to just not let your diet get in the way of a social life. Go to places, make plans with people, and just bring your own food, and don't make it always about the food. There's so many things we can do without food. You can also invite people over to show like, hey, my door is open. I want to have friends. I still want to be a part of this circle group. I don't want food to get in the way of this. So it's really important that you do that. But I do think it is extra challenging to go out to eat, go to a friend's house when you have multiple issues that someone has to, cook for. And it's scary. I mean, even I've cooked for people who have other allergies beyond gluten. Obviously I can cook gluten-free, like, with my eyes closed, but when they come here and they have other issues or nut allergies and stuff like that, I have to be extra vigilant and careful. And it is a little scary to cook for someone who has multiple food allergies, intolerances, and preferences. You just don't want to hurt them. So I get it. And at the same time, it's on you to really make those plans and try not to make it always about food, right?
There's a number of questions about gluten in other grains. Luann says, Dr. Osborne says that corn and rice are not gluten-free. Well, that's true, they're not, but it's not the bad gluten of wheat, rye, and barley. But some people are sensitive to the gluten in corn or the gluten in rice. You can be allergic to tomatoes. You can be allergic to anything. It turns out that, the science tells us 50% of celiacs also are sensitive to the gluten in corn, but not all of them are. But many of them can be. There's another question. I'm told corn is gluten-free, but does the body treat it like gluten? That's from Robert on Facebook. Corn has gluten proteins. They're just not the bad gluten proteins of wheat. But you can be sensitive to the gluten proteins of corn. See, it's so confusing. We think of gluten and we think it's the name of the bad proteins in wheat, rye, and barley. No. Gluten is a category of proteins. There's gluten in rice, there's gluten in corn, there's gluten in buckwheat, there's gluten in quinoa, there's gluten in millet, there's gluten, of course, in couscous, but that's a wheat. Couscous is a wheat. But other grains have gluten in them. Now, if you're sensitive to the gluten in wheat, your odds are probably higher that you would be sensitive to the gluten in, well, actually, we know in corn it's 50%. I've not seen studies on rice or quinoa or other grains as to how frequently it occurs. So some doctors just recommend stay away from all grains. And there's nothing wrong with that recommendation. It makes it a little more difficult. We recommend avoiding the bad glutens to begin with, and go ahead and have some oats. Just make sure they're gluten-free oats, as Jenny described earlier, and always take enzymes with them. But if people don't get better, don't notice they're feeling better within 3 weeks, then we'll take the oats out and we'll take out the corn and the rice and go grain-free. But to try to make it easier to transition into a gluten-free lifestyle, we'll let them have other grains until there's evidence that they shouldn't. Jenny, anything you want to add to that?
I think that's a really good approach. Like, eat grains until your body or evidence tells you not to. I think that in this community, we could get into this icky territory of disordered eating. And we really want to make sure that you are still able to live your life and eat foods. And so I do think if you eat gluten-free and you generally eat healthy, 80-90% of the time, you're going to be okay. Your body is going to heal, and you're going to be able to tolerate a lot of foods that maybe some people are saying you can't. So I really do think it is starting with gluten. It is starting with healing your diet. It's starting with adding, extra servings of vegetables to your plate before you start giving up whole food groups.
Kim on Facebook said, I heard a group today saying that once you heal leaky gut, that some people can tolerate gluten. Does the wheat Zoomer test sometimes show negative later? Yeah, it should show negative on a follow-up test once you've applied the principles that we teach you. Absolutely. If it doesn't, if it's not better, we've done something wrong. You know, some people will take a year to heal. Some people will take 4 months to 6 months. We never recommend retesting before 6 months, and usually a year. You know, it takes a while, but then your test should be much better, or we didn't do our job.
Right.
But to this question, Kim, a group say, once you heal, look, if I get a cut on my skin, it's going to heal, and it'll heal pretty quickly. Great. When you get leaky gut, a cut on the inside of your intestines, when you get leaky gut, it doesn't heal. The environment inside the gut, your microbiome, all of the good guys and the bad guys and the bacteria and viruses that are inside your gut, that creates the inflammatory state that causes the leaky gut. When you rebuild your microbiome, which takes a year to 2 years to do, when you rebuild the microbiome so you no longer have an inflammatory microbiome, then your leaky gut tests come back negative. But to take some pills or to take some products, say, oh, I'm healing my leaky gut. Show me the evidence. Right. Show me the pre and post tests that say that this product healed the leaky gut. And it's okay to have a little once in a while. That is, my response to that is shame on you. And I'll go toe to toe with anybody on that. There is no science to that at all. We know that it takes a nanogram. When you read the science, Detlef Schupan at Harvard, very famous gastroenterologist, showed it takes a nanogram of amylase trypsin inhibitors in wheat to activate toll-like receptor 4. A nanogram is a billionth of a gram. That's all it takes to turn on the sentry, standing guard there to protect you, who, when he sees wheat come in, he's going to activate the entire inflammatory cascade that we talked about earlier. And you get the elevated antibodies to Hashimoto's once again for 2 to 4 months from a single exposure. So this utter nonsense, BS, that you can have wheat on occasion, excuse me for being direct, but I want to make sure there's no misinterpretation here of what I'm saying. Once you cross the line of tolerance and your wheat Zoomer or other tests comes back positive, you cannot go back and have a little once in a while. You can't be a little pregnant. You can't have a little wheat. And it just really bothers me to hear people out there presenting themselves as experts saying that kind of crap. Excuse me.
Love it. The passion.
Yeah.
And it's true. I mean, if you're feeling better and you have healed your gut, or you've put your celiac in remission or whatever, or your symptoms in remission, why would you go back on gluten? You're just going to start the whole cascade again. You're going to just fuel the fire. It worked. It didn't mean you were cured. It worked, and it's working, and you keep doing it. You know, just because you lost the weight doesn't mean once you start eating, you're not going to put the weight back on again, right? Like, it's not permanent. You have to be consistent. You have to stay the course and continue to keep your gut in good shape. And you have to continue to eat gluten-free, and gluten's just going to keep damaging your gut. Everything that you healed is going to go back into, bad zone again, I guess.
Right. Faina, F-A-I-N-A on Facebook says, can I reverse Hashimoto's by being gluten-free? And we're so excited to have even more science than ever before now. Professor Schoenfeld, in the article that I talked about earlier about so many different autoimmune diseases, he said the most common disease that responds to a gluten-free diet is Hashimoto's thyroid disease, and then psoriasis. So yes, being gluten-free can be a critically important component. There may be more that you have to, there almost always is more. It's not just gluten-free, but you get a huge shift in the direction of better health by going gluten-free if you have Hashimoto's most of the time. And the way to know is to do the wheat Zoomer test. And we've got the link in here for you for the wheat Zoomer test. Lorraine says, I would like to take Dr. Tom's course on gluten. Is there a link that I can join to take that course? Yes, Lorraine. We'll post it here for the Certified Gluten-Free Practitioner Program, if that's what you mean. But Jenny and I are going to be launching a course just after, was it the 4th of July?
Yeah, just mid-July, yes.
Mid-July. So that's going to be a consumer-based course. My course, the Certified Gluten-Free Practitioner, is more of a healthcare practitioner-based course. So you'll have two options there for you, Lorraine. Would using a true sourdough for baking bread, for example, make it okay to include a little gluten for non-celiac gluten-sensitive individuals occasionally? I love sourdough bread. I love it, and I miss it so much. And the answer is absolutely not. No, you can't. With a caveat. Paper came out 4 years ago, where they fermented flour, the dough, they made sourdough with 7 different cultures of Lactobacillus san franciscus, like number 142 and 138, and I don't remember the numbers of the cultures. But when they used 7 different cultures, they completely broke down the proteins. It did not activate any inflammation whatsoever. So it is possible, but it is not commercially viable yet, as far as I know. So for all of the other sourdough, and it's been tested, lots of papers on this, the answer is no. Sorry, man, but no. Good try, good question, but no.
I just make my own sourdough from gluten-free flours.
There you go. Oh, that's great. I'm coming to your house. Linda says, a friend who had celiac found that she had to cut out all grains. What this may be because it was contaminated, or should I avoid all grains? Don't have celiac, but concerned. Jenny, you want to answer that one?
Well, I wouldn't know why someone with celiac would have been told to cut out all grains. I don't know if they did additional testing or stuff like that as well. But the truth is, the 3 grains that you have to cut out are wheat, barley, and rye, and then sometimes oats that we've already covered. And so I think that's a great place to start. And again, once you heal your gut, you're going to see that your body is going to be able to tolerate foods that maybe you thought were once off limits, except for gluten, of course. And so I can't really, address why your friend was told to give up all those grains. But I also know that we are all unique bio individuals, right? Like we all react different to different foods. And so I would encourage someone who is maybe giving up multiple food groups to reconsider, or really take the time to heal their body and eat healthy, and then start reintroducing some of these foods, because it can become really restrictive and can get you kind of down a stickier path. And I think like life can be really great giving up gluten, eating very healthy, and still not having all these restrictions that just make it impossible to have a social life or to live, things like that. So that's how I would answer that question. I just would need more information, to be honest.
My good friend, Dr. Peter Osborne, recommends complete grain-free, and people get well. There's no question. It's more difficult to do, and sometimes we have to move to that. As I said earlier, once again, we let people have other grains, and if in 3 weeks they aren't feeling better, then we take out the grains and see how they do that way. But there's, Dr. Osborne is a no-nonsense guy, right. And he's not wrong in his recommendation. It's just more difficult to implement. Sometimes it's necessary, but as Jenny is saying, sometimes it's not.
Right. And there's a spectrum, right? Like there's, exactly. And you got to find where you fall on that spectrum, because really it's not a one size fits all approach.
Right. Let's see. A friend. Okay. So will things like bone broth help to ease the load on the gut and help to heal the gut? That's from Joan. Yeah, great question, Joan. Yes, bone broth is high in gelatin tannate. Gelatin tannate acts like a seal over the damaged inside lining of the gut, so that as food and stuff is going by, it doesn't irritate it so much and it can heal much quicker. So yeah, the bone broth is one of the ingredients that in my training course, all of our practitioners know why bone broth is beneficial to use. For all mankind on Zoom, Jenny's gluten-free sourdough recipe, please.
Oh my goodness. Okay, I gotta look it up. I have it. I do have a link.
Okay.
But you have to make a starter first, which I have a link to as well.
I'm going to go to the next question while you're looking.
Okay.
JD on Zoom says, today I heard a presentation by Dr. John Douillard in which he characterized the lymph system as the way the body distributes fat throughout the body. How does this relate to LPS levels? Would Dr. Tom Cotton? Now that's interesting. LPS, when LPS stands for lipopolysaccharides, it is the main bad guy that accumulates over years for people in their tissue and eventually puts people at high risk of what's called sepsis. And 1.7 million people died. My most current numbers are from 2020. 1.7 million people developed sepsis, and 260,000 of them die from it. It's the most common cause of death of elders in hospital setting is sepsis, and it's just accumulated LPS. So the idea that LPS is being distributed through the lymphatic system is valid. It's in the blood, and it's in the lymphatics, so that's valid. So lymphatics can carry LPS. I hope that answers your question. Lucy asks, thoughts on einkorn? It's wheat. There's nothing else to say. The ancient grains are just as bad, Lucy, as the modern grains, unfortunately. Christina says, good afternoon from Costa Rica, Pura Vida. I was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis 11 years ago, and I have been having a lot of problems with food. Will it be helpful for me to try a gluten-free diet? Thanks. Yes, Christina, it will be helpful, absolutely helpful. And I'm going to recommend Dr. Patricia Madrigal, Madrigal, Patricia Madrigal to you. She's in San Jose. She's an excellent functional medicine practitioner, and she can walk with you in this process of healing your gut. Itis means angry. Bursitis means your bursa are inflamed, they're angry. Arthritis means your joints are inflamed, they're angry. Colitis means your gut is inflamed and angry. That's what you have to know about colitis. It's an angry gut. So why is it inflamed? And what's causing this inflammation? That's what you have to find out. And Dr. Madrigal is really great for that. She's a good friend. Haley asks, I'm in the UK. Can I still purchase your supplements? Yes, Haley. Yes, Wheat Rescue is available in the UK, distributed in the UK. The E3 Advanced Plus, you'd have to order from theDr.com and write to info@theDr.com to ask them what the shipping charges would be. So if you want to get both, you can get the Wheat Rescue in London, and then the E3 Advanced Plus we can ship to you, but you have to find out what the shipping costs are for that. Can consuming gluten contribute to cancer? Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's a very common contributing cause to some cancers. Interestingly, it seems to be for celiacs, there's a reduction in breast cancer and prostate cancer. Not that much, but a little bit less if you're a celiac risk for those cancers, but other cancers like lymphoma and leukemia are more common. Norma says, how about corn chips? Does that cause the same kind of reaction like gluten? Well, if you're sensitive to corn, it does. Or if you have this cross reactivity of corn with gluten, it will. By the way, corn, if you're not buying organic corn chips, you're getting GMO corn chips. And GMO corn chips have this thing called Bt toxin in them. Bt toxin by itself causes leaky gut, intestinal permeability. So the number one guy in the world on information about GMO foods, Jeffrey Smith, and his Institute for Responsible Technology. He did an interview with me one time, and I was talking about E3 Advanced Plus, and he said, well, will it deal with Bt toxin? And I said, I don't know. I've never seen any science on that, but I'll find out. So I hired the laboratory, and I sent them E3 Advanced Plus, and I said, tell us about Bt toxin. E3 Advanced Plus breaks down 64% of Bt toxin. Nothing has been shown to break down Bt toxin in the human body. Nothing. E3 Advanced Plus does. That was very cool when we found that out. We were just so happy to have an added benefit there. Oh my gosh, we've gone over by 15 minutes. I'm so sorry. It's so, Jenny, it's so easy. We could just go on and on, isn't it?
Let's go for another hour.
Right. It would be easy to do that. Well, thank you so much, Jenny, for being here tonight. Once you started answering questions, the questions just started flying in here. I mean, it's unbelievable. There's like 3 or 4 to begin with, and all of a sudden, boom, there's 30, 40, I don't know how many now.
It's always interesting to answer questions when I'm learning from you. You're the one that needs to answer them.
Well, and I'm learning from you too. I mean, it's a nice win-win situation. Okay, well, thank you very much, Jenny, for being here today, and we'll do this again.
Thank you so much.
Yes, and thank you everyone for being here. Have a wonderful week. We will see you next week. Bye-bye.